Right, guys, so it's been another dreadful week as a Manchester United fan. Started off decent with a 3-0 win against Palace, lost to Palace in the league, then to cap it all off, lost to Galatasaray. Now we've got an important game against Brentford. And this video, I'm just going to talk about. It's a funny video because I'm not going to give Ten Hag praise, but I'm beginning to identify a pattern of play with Manchester United ever since they signed Amrabat. But I'm still very pessimistic about this style of play because I don't think we've got the correct players for it, and this system doesn't tend to work with our players. So against Palace when we won 3-0, just an overview of this video, we started to implement this box midfield that other teams have been implementing. We started to play out from the back, and then when we went to play Palace again on Saturday, we lost 1-0, and that's because Palace tweaked their formation, they tweaked their tactics a little bit, they pressed a bit higher up the pitch. And then against Galatasaray, I think again, a lot of United fans were very frustrated because United were playing this long ball type football instead of this possession based football. So we essentially saw a style of play when we beat Palace 3-0, and we didn't build on this style of play. And I'm going to talk about why United are struggling to build on this style of play, especially when we've now seen this box midfield. So the box midfield essentially appears in two forms. Either Amrabat, who's been starting at left back due to our injuries, drops as like a third centre back or drops as a third man to play out from the back. He either drops in as left centre back or he comes in at centre back. And then what would happen is Hannibal would push up and Mason Mount and Hannibal would try and occupy the two half spaces. We'll get to that point there later. And then Dalot would often come in and would play the inverted fullback role. And as a result, what we would get is we get this box midfield bit of Casemiro, Mount, and Hannibal. Or sometimes what we would see is we would see Amrabat come in here, and then Dalot, Varane, and Lindelof will build out from the back. Or what we would see is we would see Amrabat playing the inverted role and Casemiro. So Amrabat will play the inverted role. Casemiro would drop as a third centre back almost, and then we would have two inverted fullbacks and Amrabat and Dalot, and then Casemiro, Varane, and Lindelof will build up from the back. In the Palace game in which Man United won 3-0, essentially what happened was Amrabat would drop in, and we had the box midfield of Casemiro, Dalot, Mount, and Hannibal. Now, the crucial reason why United looked so good that night was because Palace, the first thing that Palace did was, I don't think the game meant much to Palace, so they set up in a traditional 4-4-2, and essentially what happened was they just completely. Their two strikers were very far apart. They were mainly trying to cut out the passing lanes between the centre backs. And essentially, it was very easy because there was so much space for United. All United could do, they could play the ball from their centre backs. They could play the ball to Dalot or to Casemiro. Or what would happen, and United did very well, was Amrabat would look out and hit the ball out wide. Bruno and Rashford didn't play against Palace, but I'm just using Bruno and Rashford because they did play against Palace in the Premier League and they did start against Galatasaray. So in the League Cup, I'm aware that I think it was Pellistri and Garnacho that started. But the point of the tactical emphasis that I want to put on this video is that Palace didn't press, so therefore United could play out from the back at leisure and can hit passes out wide. So the passes were going out to Pellistri, and then Lindelof will be picking out Garnacho on this side. And then once the ball travelled, so once United got the ball out wide, what would then happen was the United would occupy the half spaces with either Mount and Hannibal, or it would be whether it was Mount and Ericsson. And then what you have was this type of situation here. So you would have Mount in this half space, or Donny and Ericsson in this half space. Then you had Højlund through the middle, and then you had Rashford coming up wide, and then you had this sort of formation where United essentially created a 1-2-3-4-5v4 at the back, and then United's two midfielders would United's two DMs, the one inverted fullback and Dalot and Casemiro would push up and squeeze Palace. The reason why United couldn't build on this is because it comes down to the fact that United, when pressed, they don't have press resistant players. So I'm going to talk about what that means. But then also it's because United are very slow to build up from the back. And that comes down to two things, which I'm going to talk about right now. So the reason why Man United struggled against Palace in that 1-0 loss, and it's very similar to the reason why they struggled against Galatasaray, it's carbon copy, is that when teams then press and Palace tweak their formation, so they went with they were 4-4-2, and this time they were very narrow. And with this narrow formation, what they did was they essentially tried to make sure that United's three centre-backs couldn't find the traditional pass of when Palace went narrow, so they went really narrow, and then when United tried to go out wide, what Palace did very well was they played a very high line, and then they reduced the gap between their defence and midfield, so there was less space for United to operate in behind. So when Palace began the press, it's very important, I want you to understand this point here. Palace did not press to win the ball back, they pressed to make United go long. Now what they did very well was Palace is they made sure that the front two played very narrow and pressed high so they could cut out the passing lane. So therefore, Palace created their own little pressing box where Casemiro and Dalot could not get the ball. So United's two, Casemiro dropping deep and Dalot playing that inverted fullback role, they wanted to make sure that they wanted United to shuffle side to side and Palace would follow. But then once they did that, they tried to make sure that United couldn't just thread the ball to Dalot or thread the ball to Casemiro. How Ten Hag tried to deal with this was he tried to create decoys, so Casemiro would drop and then Amrabat would go in with Dalot, or Dalot would drop and then Casemiro and Amrabat would go in. But either way, Palace stuck to their principle of making sure that United could not play that ball into Amrabat and Casemiro. Now, another problem that United incurred with this was that when Hannibal would drop, Palace were happy to let Hannibal have the ball in areas where they couldn't hurt the Crystal Palace defence. So then this would then mean that Palace went man for man out wide. And then what would happen is they had a 2v1 over here, but then it will be the centre-back's job to isolate Højlund over here, and then it will be another centre-back's role to look after Mount in this position here. So United lost their numerical superiority in the build-up. So normally when United had the 5v4, they now ended up having the 4v4 because either Hannibal or Mount would have to drop deep to collect the ball. Now once they dropped deep to collect this ball, there was no space for United to run in behind. So what United had to do was they had to go long from... They had to go long. They tried to find Rashford out here, or they tried to go long for Bruno, or they'll hit the ball long to Højlund. And this is the exact same issue they had with Galatasaray. A lot of the chances United created was in this area, and it was actually down to Casemiro's brilliance. So Casemiro would play in this area over here, and he was playing one-touch football with Rashford going up and Bruno going up and Højlund going up, and then United would go long, and then they required to win the second ball. But now they just can't do that anymore, because when that's not coming off, it just looks like long ball, long ball, long ball. The reason why United are going long is because they can't thread the through quickly from defence into midfield. And as a result of that, because their centre backs are taking too long on the ball with Varane or Lindelof, and then United's midfield of Amrabat and Casemiro, they're becoming very, very congested in midfield. So there's no room for United centre-backs to thread this ball through. And when they can't thread this ball through, they have no option but to go out long. And then they're just relying on winning the second ball.